The Russians are focusing their attention onto Donbas, and this is really a strategic move. The Russians initially tried to take the city of Kiev, but they were at a disadvantage because the Russians don't really train that much in urban warfare. The Russians train to fight on open territory, which is what Donbass mainly consists of, open territory. And it is in such an environment where tank warfare thrives because on an open territory, you can drive a tank at full throttle. When the Russians were trying to take Kiev, they had to fight in close quarter combat, and that would give the Ukrainians the opportunity to fire their smart missiles from close range. And all this really required was for somebody to point and shoot, and the missile did the rest of the work. So it was obviously quite difficult for the Russians to try to take Kiev, and it's a lot easier to take a region like Donbas because a huge chunk of the population there wants to be ruled under Russia anyway. And Donbas has the biggest population of people who want to be under Moscow. They don't want to be under Kiev. You already have two Russian satellite states in Donbas, the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, and those people have been fighting against Kiev for 8 years. So Russia, by moving to Donbas, puts itself at an advantage against Kiev. And I don't think this war is going to end anytime soon. Even if you have peace talks and Russia is given Donbas, that is not going to stop the conflict. It's only going to intensify the animosity and really the will to resume the war against Russia. It's only going to exasperate ultranationalism in Ukraine because the Ukrainians now have more territory. They took Crimea in 2014, and if they take Donbas, then Russia has another chunk of Ukraine and another foothold into the country. And the ultranationalists are obviously going to use this, or they would use this as propaganda fodder for their cause. And the cries of Stepan Bandera will only get louder. And a Russian victory in Ukraine would mean a dramatic change in the face of the European Union as we know it. The European Union has already been changing. And this alteration continues to intensify as this war goes on. When Russia first invaded Ukraine back in February, the Germans already started talking about boosting up their defense budget to 100 billion euros, making Germany one of the biggest defense spenders in the world. And a Russian victory on the borders of Europe would mean an intensification of German militarism. And it would also mean an intensification of the language about an independent Germany, a Germany independent of America's global security umbrella. Back in 2014, when Russia took Crimea, the Germans started saying things like, well, look, Russia just took a chunk of Ukraine, and we are very close to Russia. We are very close to Ukraine. We can't put all of our trust on the Americans. We can't. So we have to depend on ourselves. When Brexit happened, this type of rhetoric intensified. when Trump began saying things like the Germans are slaves to the Russians and they need to pay their own fair share for their own defense, Merkel began saying things like the days of us trusting our American ally is pretty much over. And Merkel also expressed distrust for the British, the Anglosphere, because the British voted to leave the European Union, which meant that the British really didn't care that much for Europe's defense because they were leaving. And Great Britain was the biggest spender for the EU's defense, but because they voted to leave, obviously they really don't care about the defense of the EU, which means that Deutschland has to revitalize its military strength. So if Russia wins this war, and I think they will, and if Russia takes Donbas, which I think they will, the Germans will say, look, the Russians have taken more territory, which means we must revitalize our military strength. And a Russian victory would mean Germany continuing the impeachment of NATO's, or really the impeachment of America's global security umbrella. The Germans will intensify their calling into question of the American security umbrella, which would basically mean deepening the revolt against the American empire by re-strengthening Germany's military. And so this is the bigger picture that I see in all of this. Russia is refocusing on Donbas, where you have the largest population of Russian speakers and the largest population of people who want to be under Moscow. Russia has been doing an effective job in impeding the supply lines between Kiev and Donbas. Russia took a strategic town called Izium, and by taking this town, Russia has a more efficacious access way towards Donbas. Russia just recently took a city in Luhansk called Kremina. So Russia is making advancements. And Russia doesn't need to take over all of Ukraine. Russia, for now, just needs to take Donbas. You take Donbas, now you have a further foothold into Ukraine. You have some kind of peace talks. Fighting temporarily stops, but then eventually it'll resume. And it's quite possible that, because I don't see this war ending, I see it having a temporary ceasefire, but how many times does that actually work? How many times do these ceasefires work, right? They always get violated. I don't see this war really ending. What I do see is this war stopping temporarily and then resuming and intensifying. And as this conflict, as the tensions intensify, Germany increases its military strength. Turkey increases its military strength because Turkey is an historical enemy to Russia, just like Germany is. And from there, you have the prospect for another major European war becoming very, very real, intensifying even more. And I think eventually the Germans and the Russians are going to have a war against each other, just like they did in the past. I think that's inevitable. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.